At 4:45 p.m., the bridal suite at the Whitmore estate outside Savannah, Georgia, felt too clean, too quiet. My dress clung to my ribs like wet lace. The mirror showed a woman smiling for photographs, but my hands shook as if they already knew something was wrong today. The room should have been crowded with hairspray and laughter, my mother fussing, my bridesmaids fixing mascara. Instead there was only the mantel clock, tapping out seconds I could not afford. Downstairs, my son Eli waited in his tiny suit, and Rose waited beside him, hopeful still for me too. I reached behind my back for the pearl buttons and missed again, fingertips scraping silk. The dress was beautiful, and it felt like a promise I had begged the universe to keep. A stable home. A father figure. After years of scraped knees and late rent, I wanted one beginning. When the door opened, relief rushed through me so fast it made me lightheaded. I started to turn, already thinking of my vow to Ryan Blake, already planning how to laugh this jitter out later. Then hands touched my spine. Large. Steady. Cold even through fabric. Not Ryan at all. They worked down the line of pearls with mechanical patience, closing me into the gown like sealing an envelope. My pulse thudded in my ears, louder than the clock. I held my breath, waiting for a familiar joke, a warm apology, anything that would make this harmless. Nothing came back. I spun, skirt whispering across carpet, and the stranger stood there as if he had always belonged in this room. Tall, broad, dressed in black that looked tailored to violence and boardrooms alike. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes like winter water. His calm was the loudest thing in the suite. My first instinct was to scream and yank the door open. The handle did not move when I tried it. Not a visible lock, just finality, like someone had already written the scene. The suite felt managed. I swallowed panic, forced my shoulders down, and studied him instead right away. He gave his name without hesitation, Dante Devereaux. It sounded like a headline, not a guest. He informed me, in that same even tone, that Ryan was not coming. Not late, not stuck in traffic, not getting cold feet. Simply removed from the board. My mouth went dry as sand. He held out a phone, angled so I could not pretend I hadn't seen it. Ryan's face, camera glare, wrists cuffed. Arrested 40 minutes earlier, the article said, for fraud and conspiracy tied to investor losses of $12 million. My knees softened. The room tilted, and my breath turned shallow fast. I pictured Eli's hand in Rose's, both of them waiting for music and for me. If I screamed, everyone would turn, and my son would learn that hope can shatter in public. I pressed my palms to the vanity, swallowed the sting in my throat, and forced myself to think. Ryan had promised I could stop gripping life so tightly. He smiled at Eli like he meant forever, talked about school pickups and Saturday pancakes. I let myself believe him because belief is cheaper than loneliness, and I was tired. Now that screen turned every sweet memory into evidence today. Dante watched me the way a banker watches a signature, as if my shaking could be measured and priced. He smelled of cedar and rain. His eyes flicked to my ring, my bouquet, the open door. He looked past romance and saw logistics. And the logistics already belonged to him. Only then did I notice what was missing besides my friends. The makeup bag was closed, not rummaged. The garment steamer was unplugged. My phone lay face down, dark, like it had been put to sleep. Someone had cleared the room for him, and I was the only piece left. I wanted to lunge for the window, but the panes were sealed shut. I wanted to bargain, but I didn't know the currency. So I did what I do at playgrounds when strangers linger too close. I asked about my child first. Dante's attention sharpened, and my fear became focus. He didn't shout or rush me. He laid out the facts the way an adult explains a storm. It was coming whether I liked it or not. The ceremony downstairs was being delayed, then cancelled. Guests were being redirected. My absence was becoming a story, and he was writing it. In his world, my wedding wasn't sacred. It was a meeting that had changed locations. I saw it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he listened beyond me. He wasn't here for romance. He was here for leverage, and my name was written beside it now too. He stepped closer, not touching me, taking up the air. I noticed the pull of fabric at his side, the outline of something heavy under his jacket, and my body accepted what my mind resisted. This was organized and intentional. Permanent, unless I made it temporary for Eli and Rose. Below, a violin began to tune, a sound floating up the staircase. I imagined Eli's eyes searching the aisle, Rose's hand squeezing his. My chest tightened. Dante turned toward the hallway, as if the decision had been made, and waited for me to follow. That waiting was worse than force. I lifted my skirt and walked, because refusing was not bravery with Eli downstairs. The door opened onto a narrow service corridor. The celebration noise faded. Dante moved beside me, directing the route with certainty. I realized the wedding had ended, and whatever came next would not ask my permission. At 5 p.m., the service corridor behind the bridal suite smelled of bleach layered over lilies. I kept my skirt gathered in one fist, because the lace was heavy and my legs felt hollow. Dante Devereaux moved a half step ahead, not dragging me, not hurrying me, just choosing turns like he owned the map. I tried a door anyway. My fingers closed on the handle and met a quiet refusal. It did not rattle, it did not give, it simply stayed shut, as if the building had decided that my wedding day ended in this hallway. I could have shouted. The thought rose and died in the same breath, because shouting would echo downstairs. Eli was down there. 6 years old, proud of his tiny suit. Rose was with him, my mother who had survived raising me and now helped me raise him. If my scream reached them, Eli would learn fear in a room full of strangers. If I ran, I might get to him, but I might also bring whatever Dante was carrying right to his face. We slipped behind the kitchen and the staff stepped aside. A woman with a headset avoided my eyes. No one called security, no one challenged him. The quiet felt instructed, like everyone had been warned that the safest choice was to pretend not to notice the bride leaving her own ceremony. Dante explained the reason in the same even tone he had used in my suite, like facts were a kind of mercy. He said my late father, Jack Carter, had once moved money for the wrong people and then vanished with $10 million. In Dante's world, theft was not a story that ended at a funeral. It was a ledger line. When Jack died, the debt did not disappear. It transferred, quietly and inevitably, to the person who still carried his name in public. My mind refused the image. Jack was the man who bought me peach ice cream on hot days and clapped too loud at softball games. He was also the man who sometimes came home late, smelling like expensive cologne, eyes tired in a way he would not explain. I buried him with the version of him I needed. Dante spoke as if he had known the version Jack kept hidden. He also spoke as if Ryan had been part of it. Not as a victim, not as my rescuer, but as a man trying to negotiate his way out. Ryan knew enough to make a deal, promising to repay what Jack took and keep me untouched. Dante made it clear that Ryan's charm had sounded like commitment only because I wanted it to. Then Ryan tried to fill a $10 million hole with a bigger lie, a scheme that collapsed into federal headlines and handcuffs, with investor losses stamped at $12 million. Anger steadied my shaking. Ryan had kissed Eli's forehead in my kitchen and talked about being a family. All that time, he was treating my life like collateral. I wanted to hate Dante for standing beside me like a sentence, but the deeper ache was for myself, for believing love could cancel risk. The hallway opened near the lobby, and sound drifted in, soft and confused, like a party holding its breath. Dante paused at the corner. My heart demanded proof, so I looked once. Rose stood near the front, hands clenched tight, her face pulled into worry she could not hide. Eli was beside her, scanning the staircase like he expected me to appear any second. He still had the little toy car I told him to keep in his pocket for luck. I could have crossed that space in 3 steps, gathered him into my arms, and made this public. Then I saw the men near the entrance, black suits that did not match the wedding staff, watching without pretending. I understood a scene would not rescue Eli. It would make him a target in a room full of witnesses who would forget his name by tomorrow. Survival can look like surrender when you are a mother. Dante guided me down a side corridor and out a door I had never noticed. Afternoon heat hit my cheeks hard. The driveway curved beneath live oaks, and a black SUV waited where a bridal car should have been, windows dark as sunglasses. A man opened the rear door. I climbed in because my body chose the safest move before my pride could argue. Dante slid in beside me and the door shut with a final thud. Locks clicked. I pulled out my phone on instinct, thumb hovering over Rose's name, and watched the bars vanish. No signal, not even enough to send a single word, and we had not yet left the Whitmore estate. By 5:35 p.m. the SUV rolled through a chain-link gate and onto a strip of pavement that looked like a forgotten service road. The locks were still clicked, the windows still tinted, and my phone still dead in my palm. I watched familiar trees blur into hangars and fuel tanks, and I felt my life shrinking to whatever fit inside this back seat. Dante sat beside me like gravity, quiet, steady, already sure of the destination as if the airfield belonged to him. There were no passengers with rolling bags, no loudspeaker calls, no security lines snaking under fluorescent lights. A man in a headset opened my door as if I were expected, and I hated that my dress still brushed the ground like a costume in the wrong movie. 2 attendants moved around the vehicle without looking at my face. Not one asked my name. Not one asked why a bride was here. Silence, I realized, can be purchased, and tonight someone had paid in full already. The jet waited at the edge of the tarmac, small and sleek, its stairs lowered like an invitation that felt like a trap. The air smelled of jet fuel and hot asphalt, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. Inside, everything was cream leather and polished wood, soft lighting and spotless surfaces, the kind of luxury that pretends it is comfort. It was not. It was a private room in the sky, built to keep secrets contained with me as the secret inside. As the cabin door shut, a softer sound than a car door, my mind started running through disaster like a mother reciting emergency plans. Rose would notice my absence first. She would call Ryan, then me, then 911, her voice climbing into panic. Eli would ask why I was not coming, and someone would tell him a lie because the truth would scare him. Soon the internet would have a story with my name in it, and I would have no way to correct it. Dante did not offer comfort, but I felt his plan moving around me like invisible hands. He had already sent people to Rose with a version of events that made me look fragile instead of stolen. In that story, I had a breakdown, stepped away for privacy, needed space to breathe. It was neat. It was believable. It was also a warning: he could shape perception faster than truth could travel. Watching him, I understood why no one at the estate had challenged him today. I forced my attention back to the only thing that mattered, the place my fear always returned. Eli. Rose. I needed more than reassurances that sounded like business. Dante made it clear, in the blunt way he did everything, that my mother and my son were being moved to a secure location before sunset, protected by people who could not be bribed and who did not improvise. Hearing that, I hated myself for the lift of relief in my chest, because it came from him. They guided me up the stairs. My heels tapped metal, and the sound felt too loud in the open air. Inside, I sank into a seat that hugged my shoulders, and the seatbelt clicked shut with a snap. The cabin hummed as the engines warmed, a steady vibration that traveled through my bones. I looked down at the lace pooled in my lap and wondered how long it would take for the world to stop calling me a bride and start calling me missing. Dante sat across from me, scrolling through messages with the same focus Ryan used when he said he was handling things. The comparison made my stomach twist. Ryan had promised he could fix the mess my father left behind, promised I would never have to explain Jack's shadows to my son. Now Ryan was in a cell, and I was here, watching a stranger manage my future like logistics. The plane began to taxi, and I realized we were leaving before anyone could catch up. The runway stretched ahead, and the engines deepened into a roar that pressed me back into the seat. My fingers clamped the armrests until my wrists ached. I kept seeing Eli's face in the lobby, kept hearing the violin trying to start without me. The wheels lifted, and the estate, the city, the river all shrank into a postcard. Clouds slid under the wings like a curtain closing. I understood the fact of it. Whatever happened next would happen far from anyone who loved me. Dante did not relax once we were airborne. He watched the cabin like a man expecting trouble, and that chilled me more than the altitude. The promise about Rose and Eli being secured before sunset returned, not as kindness but as a calculation, and it still kept me breathing. If he was moving me this fast, it was because someone was hunting. I accepted the truth last. Another hand had arranged my disappearance, and the man beside me might be shield as well as captor. At 8:10 p.m. the jet door opened onto cold Wisconsin air, and I tasted lake water and kerosene at the same time. A black car waited, windows dark, engine already warm, and I slid inside with my wedding dress folded like a surrendered flag. Streetlights vanished after the last town sign, replaced by trees, stone walls, and cameras that looked like garden lanterns. When the gates parted, the estate appeared, all glass and clean lines, lit from within as if it were floating. Beautiful. Silent. Watching. Dante followed unhurried, and I understood this place was built for keeping people. Inside, the hush felt expensive, like the carpets had been trained not to speak. Minimal art hung on pale walls, sharp shapes that made my stomach tighten. Men stood in corners pretending to be furniture, hands loose, eyes never blinking at the same time. I kept looking for uniforms, badges, anything normal, but everything here was disguised as taste. A woman in a simple navy dress approached with a tray and the calm of someone who knew storms. I learned her name was Mrs. Delaney, the housekeeper, and her kindness came with careful boundaries. She set warm soup down, gently. Mrs. Delaney led me down a hallway that smelled of lemon polish and clean linen. A guest room door opened with a soft seal, and the space looked staged for rest. A king bed, thick white duvet, lamps dimmed to a flattering glow, a bathroom of marble and spotless glass. I should have felt grateful. Instead my eyes burned, because every perfect detail told me I was expected to stay. The windows did not open. The closet held a robe in my size. Luxury was not freedom. It was a softer kind of cage. I sat on the edge shaking. A knock came soon after, and Mrs. Delaney returned with a small box and a look that asked me not to argue. Inside was a new phone, sleek and heavy, and I understood it was not a gift. I was told, in the polite way rules are delivered here, that this device was secured and monitored. My old phone disappeared into her pocket like it had never existed. I was allowed one short message to Rose, only enough to calm her, not enough to summon help. I wrote with trembling thumbs and swallowed the parts one needed to say most. When she left, the room felt larger, emptier, as if the furniture was pretending I wasn't there. I stared at the television, the untouched water glasses, and tried to imagine Eli eating dinner without me. My mind jumped ahead to courtrooms, to strangers deciding whether a mother who vanished was fit to keep her child. I pictured headlines pairing my name with Ryan's fraud as if I had been his accomplice. Rose would fight for me, but even she couldn't argue with silence. I pressed my forehead to the window and promised myself I would not become a ghost again. Somewhere beyond my door, the house breathed in controlled rhythms, soft footsteps, a distant elevator, the faint click of a lock resetting. I caught glimpses of Dante only once, a shadow crossing the corridor, as if he were checking that his world still held. He did not look in. That restraint felt intentional, a reminder that he could claim space without touching it. I showered because it was something I could choose, then wrapped myself in the robe and sat on the bed, listening for any sound that did not belong. Even the silence sounded trained. My skin stayed awake. I turned off the lamp and tried to sleep the way I used to after double shifts, by counting breaths and pretending tomorrow was normal. It did not work. Each minute stretched and snapped, and my thoughts kept circling Eli, circling Rose, circling the way my name might be spoken tonight by strangers. Near midnight I heard movement outside my door, not hurried, not clumsy, just purposeful. A pause. Another step. The sound of someone stopping to listen. I held my breath and realized the estate was not only holding me in. It was holding something out from outside tonight. The idea should have comforted me, that walls and guards and locked windows meant protection, but it landed like a second set of handcuffs. If someone was hunting me, then Dante's cage was also my only shelter, and that contradiction made my stomach twist. I lay still, listening to the footsteps fade, then return, like a patrol making sure the perimeter stayed sealed. My new phone sat on the nightstand, glowing with no notifications, only its own authority. I understood I would not be questioned in the morning. I would be questioned by Dante, and my memories would become tools. At 7:15 in the morning, the estate smelled of coffee and cold stone. I had not slept, but my body kept pretending it could. My wedding dress hung in a closet like a white accusation, and my bare feet learned the silence of expensive floors long before. Mrs. Delaney led me to the kitchen, where sunlight touched nothing warm. A table was set with fruit, toast, and a pot of dark coffee. Dante sat at the far end, scrolling through reports on a tablet, jaw still, eyes fixed, as if hunger was optional and sleep was rumor. In my old apartment, mornings meant Eli asking for cereal and cartoons, Rose calling to check on us, and me rushing for work with one shoe missing. Here, the only sound was cutlery placed with care. Even the refrigerator hum felt supervised. I sat, hands folded, waiting, trying to breathe. Dante made it clear, without raising his voice, that breakfast was not hospitality. It was a briefing. He wanted my memory, the way a locksmith wants a key. He indicated the wedding, the lobby, the suite, and the minutes before everything snapped. I felt my mind weighed on a scale. I used to think noticing was anxiety. Then I became a mother. You learn who is too close to the swing set, who watches a child without blinking, who smiles but never uses your kid's name. Survival turns observation into a habit you cannot switch off even when you want. So I went back in my head, to 4:45 p.m., to the bridal suite clock, to the empty chairs and the perfume that had already faded. I remembered how the hallway felt cleared, how staff avoided eye contact, how every door seemed to decide for me long before. I remembered the hands at my back, closing pearls with a steady rhythm, and the cold certainty in the room when I turned. Dante's suit looked new, but his calm looked old, like a man who had practiced staying still while other people panicked around him until fear became routine. Then I replayed the lobby scene, the violin tuning, Eli's small shoulders under that borrowed jacket, Rose gripping his hand. My eyes had darted past guests to the edges. That was where I saw him, a man in a gray coat near the exit as he counted footsteps, not music. I had dismissed him as a vendor or a late guest. But my mind stored him anyway, the way he kept his head down, the way his right hand stayed near his pocket. When he shifted, light caught a ring, black stone, sharp edges, like onyx in steel briefly visible. When I described that ring, Dante stopped moving. The air changed, thin and cold. His eyes lifted from the tablet and fixed on my face as if I had just spoken a code. It was the first time his attention felt personal, not procedural, and it scared me more today. He let the names surface in the room, not for drama, but because it meant something heavy. Silas Hawke. I could tell from the way Dante's jaw tightened that this was not a local thug. This was a broker, someone who sold violence like a service and walked away clean. A strange spark lit under my fear. I was not only a hostage in a borrowed robe. I was a witness who could give shape to threats. Years of watching Eli at pickup lines reading adults for danger had trained my eyes. For the first time that training mattered here. Dante shifted the questions tighter, pushing me to remember where the gray coat stood, who he watched, what path he took. I pictured the exit, the flower arch, the hallway to the service door. My stomach clenched at how easily my memory could become a map for someone else's plans. I had thought this was about my father's $10 million and Ryan's greed, about a ledger that wanted balance. Silas Hawke made it different. If a professional facilitator was involved, then I was not paying a debt. I was standing in the center of a hunt, tagged by association from yesterday. My relief about Eli and Rose being secured before sunset curdled into dread. Protection meant relocation, new routines, and strangers guarding my son while I sat here answering questions. I hated that Dante's system could keep them safe, and I feared what it would cost him to do it today. After breakfast, the house loosened its grip by a fraction. Mrs. Delaney mentioned I might step outside later, under watch, for air. The idea of sun on my face felt almost sinful. It also stirred an old memory of my father and gardens, a phrase I could not yet name. Dante's attention returned to his tablet, but the room stayed frozen around Silas Hawke's name. I felt it in my throat, the truth settling like ice. This was bigger than a stolen $10 million, bigger than Ryan's $12 million collapse. Someone had chosen me as leverage, and now I was the game. 2:30 in the afternoon came with a thin sun and a colder wind off the lake. Mrs. Delaney walked me through a side door and stopped where the gravel path began, as if the house ended and the rules began. Men stood far enough away to pretend they were gardeners, but their eyes tracked me like cameras. Actual cameras hid in lanterns and under eaves, blinking tiny red dots that vanished when I stared. I breathed in pine and damp earth and told myself this was not freedom, just a longer leash, and I could not waste it today. The greenhouse sat behind a hedge of boxwood, its glass panes fogged from heat inside. When I stepped in, warmth wrapped my shoulders and made my skin prickle, like walking into a memory. The air smelled of soil, citrus, and wet leaves. Lemons hung heavy on small trees, bright against the green light filtering through the roof. My dress was gone now, replaced by borrowed clothes, but I still felt stitched into someone else's plan. I brushed my fingers along a clay pot, and the grit under my nails felt real, grounding, mine. For a moment I forgot to tremble. I had not thought about my father in years without anger, but the smell of lemon trees cracked something open. Jack Carter used to grow herbs behind our rental, coaxing basil from cracked plastic tubs. He would pat the dirt like it could listen, then say, half joking, half warning, that the garden remembers. Back then it sounded like one of his strange sayings, the kind adults toss out to avoid explaining the real thing. Now the phrase returned with weight, and I felt it tugging me toward a specific corner where the floor met a low brick ledge nearby. I knelt and pretended to study a fern while my eyes mapped the room. A man in the doorway glanced at a watch and looked away, giving me the illusion of privacy without granting it. The brick ledge held 4 planters in a row, all identical, except one sat a fraction off-center. I slid it back and felt a soft scrape, not ceramic on brick, but ceramic on something hidden. My pulse steadied into focus. I lifted the planter, heavier than it should have been, and saw a plate bolted beneath, edges worn like it had been opened before. The bolts were old and slightly loose, as if a screwdriver had visited them more than once. I twisted them with my fingers, one by one, hiding the motion behind the planter rim. The plate lifted with a sigh, revealing a shallow compartment lined with wax paper. Inside lay a small brass key on a faded ribbon. Beneath it sat a bank envelope, thick and stiff, with my name written in block letters I recognized from childhood birthday cards. My mouth went dry. I had buried Jack, but he had buried this, waiting for me to find it now alone. Taped to the underside of the envelope was a tiny SD card, black and weightless, like a seed. My hands shook and I pressed my wrists to my knees. Shock hit first, then fury so hot my eyes stung. Jack had known danger was coming and said nothing. He let me build a future on top of secrets. He let Ryan charm his way into our kitchen and into Eli's trust. I pictured my son waiting in the lobby and wanted to scream into the greenhouse glass. Then the anger cooled into something sharper, a plan forming around priority, Eli. I slid everything back into the compartment, then froze. Dante would notice a planter moved the same way he noticed a ring across a lobby. I also knew the truth could not stay buried if someone like Silas Hawke was sniffing for it. My thoughts snapped to Rose, to her trying to keep her voice steady for Eli while strangers offered help with strings attached. My mind flattened. Timing mattered. If the envelope pointed somewhere, we had to move before the hunters adjusted. I lowered the planter, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked toward the house, heart racing. Back in my room, I opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was plain paper with a branch address and a box number, printed like a utility bill. The words were simple, almost boring, which made them worse. A safety deposit box in New York. No apology, no explanation, only direction. I stared at the brass key and pictured vault doors, cameras, strangers in suits. I pictured Dante deciding this belonged to him. Then I pictured Eli, small hand in roses, and I chose the only thing that mattered. Truth. I slid the SD card into my pocket and waited. At 11:10 in the morning, New York City looked bright and indifferent, all steel and sunlight and people who had places to be. I wore sunglasses and a borrowed coat, and I tried to walk like a woman running an errand instead of a mother carrying a secret. The brass key from the Lake Geneva greenhouse sat in my pocket, pressing into my palm every time I flexed my fingers, reminding me that Jack Carter had planned this long before he died. Dante Devereaux stayed close without touching me. We entered through a side door that wasn't marked, opened after a brief pause and a silent nod from a guard who didn't ask my name. No lobby chatter, no friendly teller, no line of ordinary people. Just marble, muted lighting, and security camera domes that tracked us like calm, polished eyes. Legitimate power, I realized, can feel just as cold as the illegal kind. A private elevator carried us down to the vault level. The air changed, cooler and drier, like the building stored its breath with its money. Rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls in perfect grids, each one a mouth that stayed shut unless you had the right metal and the right permission. I kept thinking about Eli and how he would never understand why his grandfather's name could still reach into our lives like a hook. The bank officer placed a long metal box on a narrow desk and watched my hands with practiced neutrality. I set the key down. It looked ordinary for something that had dragged me across states and into a stranger's custody. The officer unlocked the panel, slid the box out, and stepped back. I lifted the lid with slow fingers, half expecting it to be empty, half expecting it to be a trap. It wasn't empty. A thin ledger lay on top, wrapped in brown paper, edges worn and stained like it had traveled. Under it sat a flash drive in a clear sleeve, old enough to look clumsy, like something Jack bought at a drugstore and never trusted to the cloud. Last was a sealed envelope addressed to Mia Carter in my father's careful block letters. My throat tightened. I wanted to rip it open, but I forced myself to breathe and look first, the way I check Eli's seatbelt before the car moves. The ledger was not a love letter and not a confession. It was names, dates, ports, and notes in the margins that read like warnings. Some entries looked like finances, others like a map of favors. I slid the flash drive into my pocket and held the envelope against my chest for one heartbeat, letting myself feel the ache of my father's handwriting before I remembered where I was and who was watching. Then the building changed its mood. It started as a silence that didn't belong, the kind of quiet you hear when a crowd senses trouble before it knows what it is. A door closed too hard somewhere in the corridor. Footsteps approached with purpose, not the bored shuffle of staff. The bank officer's eyes flicked past my shoulder, and the color drained from his face. My skin went cold, and my mother's voice from childhood rose in my mind, warning me to run first and ask later. Dante's posture tightened. He didn't shout, but the men near the elevator moved like they had rehearsed this exact second. I stood, clutching the ledger and envelope, and my body went into the same mode it uses when Eli slips near a street: pick the safest angle, keep the important thing close, don't freeze. A sharp crack echoed down the hall. Another followed, closer. I heard a shouted command I couldn't make out, and the vault's calm shattered into brisk panic. Dante shifted me behind the desk, using his body as a wall without making it feel like comfort. He pushed me toward a side corridor, and I moved because hesitation could get me killed. We passed an open doorway and I saw a man in a gray suit slump against the wall, eyes wide, more shocked than injured in any way I could see, as if fear had emptied him. The image lodged in my throat like a stone. This was real. It had followed us here. We reached a service stairwell instead of the elevator. The door swung open onto concrete steps and a smell of dust and metal. We went down fast, my breath ragged, my shoes slipping once. I didn't look back. I didn't ask questions. Dante's hand didn't grip me, but his presence guided every turn, and I hated how safe that competence felt in my chest. Outside, a car waited with the engine running, door already open, as if the escape had been planned before the attack. In the car, I tore the seal, read, and shook. Jack hadn't taken cash, he'd taken proof that could topple men like Silas Hawke. The flash drive burned in pocket. The ambush meant someone knew our plan inside Dante's house. At 6:40 in the evening, the estate study had been turned into a war room. A long table was covered in printouts, tablets, and maps of time stamps. The air smelled like burnt coffee and toner, like a place where people hadn't blinked since New York. I stood near the doorway, hands tucked under my arms, trying not to shake. My body still remembered the vault corridor, the echo of running shoes, the way my father's sealed envelope had felt heavier than any weapon. Somewhere upstairs a housekeeper moved quietly, pretending this was a normal night. It wasn't. Not for me, not for Eli, not for Rose. Dante sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, face calm in a way that made everyone else careful. His men worked in silence, passing screens back and forth, marking notes, pulling up security logs from the bank, the car, the airfield, the estate gates. No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. Fear did the talking. A pattern emerged on the monitors first, then on paper. Tiny payments, repeated, regular, the kind of thing accountants ignore because it looks like housekeeping. The vendor name was bland, like it had been designed to vanish into a spreadsheet. A security consulting firm that did not exist. The amounts were small enough to hide in noise, but the timing was too perfect to be accidental. I watched them circle the data the way vultures circle roadkill, patient and sure. Each sheet had my father's name somewhere in the margins, each timestamp felt like a step I should have seen. I kept thinking of Rose holding Eli's hand, telling him I was safe, while I stood here learning how unsafe truth can be today. Dante's attention shifted to me, not soft, not friendly, just precise. He wanted my eyes on the words, not the numbers. He wanted to know what they sounded like. I swallowed, took the tablet, and read the descriptions the way I read people at playgrounds and parent meetings, listening for what didn't fit. The English was correct, but it wasn't natural. Phrases repeated with tiny variations, like someone copying a template without understanding the rhythm. The sentences leaned too hard on formal filler, the kind of corporate language that tries to sound professional and ends up sounding foreign. Words were stacked in the wrong order, not wrong enough for spellcheck to catch, but wrong enough for a native ear to flinch. I explained it as simply as I could in my head, because complexity would hide the point. Whoever wrote these notes knew what an invoice should look like, but not how an American actually writes one. It felt like mimicry. Like someone had studied the shape of normal life and missed the heartbeat. That led me to the obvious next step, a proxy. A new hire, a cousin, a helper with access to the system and enough English to copy but not enough to flow. The kind of person a smarter insider could use as a mask. My stomach tightened as I followed that thought to its end, because masks always belong to someone. They traced the approvals, and every arrow pointed back to one name, Caleb Reese. Dante's finance man. The one who handled the clean side, the legitimate investments, the paperwork that kept the whole empire polished. Caleb wasn't in the room. That absence suddenly felt loud. When I said his name, the room went colder. Dante didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't curse. He just went still, like a predator pausing to listen for the exact direction of a sound. I saw grief there, buried deep, and fury above it, controlled like a lid on boiling water. Betrayal cut him differently than bullets. My mind flashed to the wedding corridor, the doors that wouldn't open, the staff who looked away, the SUV waiting like it had been summoned. Then to the bank ambush that had started too quickly, too cleanly, as if someone had mailed the attackers our schedule. A leak didn't just explain the fake vendor. It explained my whole day. The team pulled up access logs, calendar entries, travel requests. Caleb had clearance for all of it. He could see where Dante would be and when. He could see where I would be moved and how. He could have fed Silas Hawke the timing and watched the trap close from a safe distance. I realized the estate wasn't a fortress. It was a house with a cracked foundation. And tomorrow, Dante would not ask Caleb questions like an accountant. He would corner the truth like a judge. I stayed by the door, breathing carefully, knowing my memory would be used again, and that the next room would feel even smaller. At 9:05 in the morning, Dante's study felt windowless even with lamps burning. Dark wood, one desk, two chairs, and a silence that made my skin tighten. I sat just inside a side alcove, close enough to hear, far enough to be mistaken for a shadow. My new phone was off, my old life still unreachable. Somewhere upstairs, Mrs. Delaney kept the house running. Somewhere farther away, Eli and Rose kept breathing without me. I promised to watch, remember, breathe, and keep steady today. Caleb Reese entered like a man walking into a meeting, not a reckoning. He wore a suit that tried to look ordinary, and it almost worked until his hands gave him away. He blinked too fast, swallowed too hard, smiled without warmth. Dante did not greet him. Dante simply waited, letting Caleb fill the space with small movements and empty confidence. I listened to the pauses between their words, because those pauses were where truth always leaked. My stomach twisted, but my eyes stayed open. Dante laid out the evidence the way a surgeon lays out tools, clean and unavoidable. He referred to the fake vendor, the repeating payments, the timing that matched our movements. Caleb tried to laugh it off, then tried to look offended, then tried to look tired. Each attempt landed wrong. When Dante mentioned New York, Caleb's knee jerked under the chair. When Dante mentioned the wedding, Caleb's eyes flicked toward the door, as if he expected rescue. I felt fear because it smelled like sweat. Caleb's voice thinned, and his shoulders rose as if bracing for impact. He denied at first, then offered half-truths about accounting errors and mistaken credentials. Dante didn't chase him. Dante waited. That patience did the damage. Caleb's breath started to hitch, and his forehead shone under the lamp. Finally the real story spilled out in fragments: a sick child, bills stacked on the counter, a threat delivered by someone who knew his home address. He had been squeezed until betrayal seemed like oxygen today. The confession turned concrete when Dante asked what he had traded for that oxygen. Caleb's face crumpled. He admitted approving invoices he never reviewed, adding a vendor he couldn't trace, and letting a cousin type descriptions in stiff English. Worse, he admitted sharing schedules, routes, and the exact hour Dante would be distracted at the Whitmore estate. He hadn't planned the ambush, he claimed, but he had handed strangers the keys to make it possible. My throat burned, imagining Eli nearby if that plan succeeded. I expected Dante to end it there, to make Caleb disappear like an erased line. Instead, Dante's stillness shifted into something colder and more deliberate. He spoke about consequences like contracts, about loyalty like debt, about the cost of breaking both. Then he offered Caleb a third path: full cooperation, names, dates, every contact, in exchange for a chance to keep his child from becoming collateral. The mercy sounded harsh, but it was mercy all the same. I heard rule underneath it, forged in pain. As a mother, I understood bargains made for children. I had worked overtime, skipped meals, swallowed pride, all to keep Eli safe and steady. Watching Caleb crumble, I wanted to hate him cleanly, but the mention of a sick kid twisted my anger into something messier. Dante's offer didn't excuse betrayal. It weaponized it, turning Caleb's guilt into leverage against Silas Hawke's network. That was the kind of mercy that felt dangerous to everyone involved. It told me Dante remembered what it meant to lose. Two men appeared at the doorway and guided Caleb out without haste, like this was paperwork, not ruin. He looked back once, eyes wet, and I wondered if he was seeing his child's face or his own funeral. When the door shut, the room inhaled. Dante stayed standing, hands braced on the desk, staring at the grain of the wood as if it could answer him. For a brief second his control cracked, and grief flickered across his features before he buried it again quietly. I backed into the alcove, heart pounding, and let my breath slow. Dante's mercy was not softness, but it was a line he would not cross, and enemies would notice. Silas Hawke would notice. So would anyone who believed fear was the only language worth speaking. I imagined Eli sleeping somewhere unfamiliar, Rose lying to him because she had no better option. I hated this double life, the one where protection and imprisonment wore the same mask, and I didn't know which would break first. Before I left the study, one of Dante's men showed him a file with my name and Ryan Blake's. I didn't need details to feel the outside world clawing back in. Ryan was in custody, but he was still talking, trading stories for favors, trying to save himself by rewriting me. The thought burned: he could weaponize my disappearance, paint me unstable, and aim straight at my motherhood. Walking back to my room, I knew the next fight would be public, not private very soon. At 1:20 in the afternoon, they brought me back to the study, but the table was cleared this time and a small black speaker sat where paperwork had been. Dante's man set my monitored phone beside it and pointed at a blinking icon. The whole setup felt like a leash disguised as courtesy. I sat with my hands folded, trying to keep my breathing quiet, because every sound in that room seemed recorded. Outside, the lake glittered like nothing had happened. A voice came through the device, professional and smooth, speaking as if my life were a file. It explained that Ryan Blake was cooperating, offering names and timelines in exchange for leniency. The voice wanted my help too, the kind of help that meant confirming a story already written. Dante, it suggested, was the real danger, the criminal anchor, while Ryan was a frightened fiancé who got pulled in too deep. For a second my mind tried to accept that simple version, because it would make everything easier to explain to Eli one day. Monsters are easier to raise a child around when they have one clear face. But my stomach rejected it. Ryan had not been dragged. He had been steering. He had smiled at my son and promised stability while hiding fraud big enough to ruin strangers. The voice kept pressing, sliding questions into polite sentences. It wanted dates, places, anything that could stitch me to Ryan's choices. Then it dropped the real hook. Ryan was claiming I knew more than I did. He was hinting that my father's past had been family business, that I had helped him understand it, that I had gone to the wedding with a plan. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I saw the move instantly. If he could paint me as complicit, his fraud looked less like greed and more like confusion. If he could make me look unstable, my disappearance became evidence of guilt instead of evidence of a kidnapping. The worst part was the next layer. He was positioning himself as the safer parent, the reasonable adult, the one who could offer Eli normal life while I spiraled. My hands started to shake, not from fear of prison, but from fear of courtrooms. I pictured strangers judging my motherhood by headlines and rumors, by Ryan's charming voice and my silence. Rose would fight, but she would be forced to explain why her daughter vanished on her wedding day. Eli would overhear adult words like unfit and witness and conspiracy, and he would learn to mistrust his own childhood. Something in me snapped cleanly. I stopped sounding like a victim even inside my own head. I asked for proof, for paperwork, for the parts they were leaving out, and I could hear the irritation under the polite tone. They wanted me pliable. They wanted me grateful for a chance to cooperate. I realized cooperation would not protect me if Ryan was willing to burn me to save himself. When the connection ended, the room stayed silent except for the soft click of the speaker powering down. I stared at the secure phone and felt disgust, not at Dante's world, but at how easily the outside world preferred a neat story. Dante watched me from the doorway, reading my face the way he read ledgers. He didn't gloat. He waited for my decision, because decisions were the only thing I still owned. I told him, in the only way I could without quoting words, that Ryan was blaming me. That he was aiming at my motherhood. Dante's expression barely changed, but the air tightened. He made it clear that Silas Hawke would exploit this angle too, because control is easier than murder. Hawke didn't need to kill me if he could turn me into a pressure point that forced Dante to react publicly and sloppily. Hearing it framed that way lit my rage into something useful. I wasn't just a woman taken from a wedding. I was a mother being used as a lever by two different men. I refused to be moved again without a plan. Dante's next steps formed quickly. They would set the meeting, choose the place, and make Hawke come to them. An old theater outside Chicago, he implied, with history and exits and shadows they could control. I went back to my room afterward and wrote Rose a message on the monitored phone, calm, saying I was alive and that Eli mattered more than any rumor. I couldn't explain where I was, but I could promise I was fighting. Then I sat on the bed and pictured Ryan practicing his smile for cameras. I promised myself he would not touch my son with lies. Tomorrow, I would walk into the trap on purpose. At 10:15 at night, the black sedan left the highway and rolled past boarded storefronts toward the old Lyric Theater outside Chicago. My pulse kept time with the windshield wipers. I wasn't brave, I was choosing action because Eli deserved a mother who didn't freeze when fear asked nicely. Dante Devereaux checked the street like he owned the darkness, then guided us through a side door scraped with graffiti. The building exhaled dust and old perfume. Somewhere above, pigeons shifted in rafters. The plan was simple in human terms: bait, witness, and patience until the hunters stepped on it. Inside, velvet seats slumped under years of neglect, and the aisle carpet held the shape of 1,000 vanished footsteps. A balcony wrapped the room like a shadowed grin. I counted exits without meaning to: lobby doors, backstage stairs, a fire hatch near the orchestra pit, and memorized who watched. Dante's men placed a small case on the front row, the kind that could hold cash or confession. I knew it held pieces of my father's ledger and the drive. They had other eyes too, silent devices tucked in curtains, while my job was seeing faces before those faces decided to move. The theater lights were dead, but a single work lamp glowed backstage, throwing long ribs of light across dust. A door hinge sighed somewhere above us. Footsteps crossed the balcony. I pictured Rose tucking Eli in and forced myself to stay steady because panic would turn me into bait again. They arrived like a rehearsal: 2 men through the lobby, 1 through the stage door, then a 4th who didn't match the others. His coat was too clean for this ruin. He didn't scan for guns, he scanned for witnesses. That's when I focused hard on the way he blinked. Caleb Reese was supposed to be miles away, contained, useful. Instead he slipped from the wings, face pale, moving as if he'd been promised protection. His hand brushed his pocket twice in a pattern, and I understood he was sending a signal, not arriving by accident. My skin went cold. Dante didn't lunge for him. He watched, still as marble, and that stillness made Caleb shake harder. Caleb drifted toward the case on the front row, eyes darting to the clean-coated man. He meant to tamper with the bait, maybe replace it, maybe poison it and blame me it failed. The clean-coated man leaned closer, and the work lamp caught his right hand. A black stone ring sat on his pinky, carved with a tiny hawk in profile. My chest tightened because I'd seen that symbol before, at my wedding. He was not a messenger. He was command and knew it. I couldn't speak without giving myself away, so I moved. I stepped into the aisle as if my legs had betrayed me, letting my shoes scrape the metal edge of the orchestra pit. The sound turned heads. My gaze locked on the ring, then flicked to Dante, once to confirm everything. Dante's attention sharpened like a blade being unsheathed, but he kept his face calm. His men adjusted positions, subtle as stagehands, closing exits without panic. The ringed man noticed too late, his shoulders rose, and his eyes searched for a fast route. The theater held its breath as I did. Caleb made his move, lunging for the case. One of Dante's men caught his wrist and twisted him down onto the velvet seat, quick and efficient. Caleb's panic spilled everything. He shouted toward the ringed man, pleading with someone unseen. That desperation was the proof Dante needed, not blood today. His hand slid inside his coat, and my lungs seized. Dante had a clear shot, a violent shortcut. He didn't take it. He stepped aside and offered the ringed man an exit that was actually a funnel. Hidden eyes in the curtains caught every movement and contact he ran to. Within minutes, the theater emptied in reverse. Hawk's people slipped away, not because they were beaten, but because their certainty cracked. Caleb sat pinned, sobbing into his own hands. Dante didn't celebrate. He collected the case, the evidence, and the recordings, building a collapse that would travel faster than rumors. I leaned against a peeling column and realized my knees were shaking. The dust tasted like pennies. I thought of Eli's bedtime stories and Rose's tired voice, and I let myself feel one breath of relief. Dante glanced at me once, not thanking me, but measuring me differently than before. On the drive back, the city lights looked ordinary again, and that ordinariness hurt. I knew the threat had loosened, but my life was still unrecognizable. Safe would mean choices, not cages. It would mean Eli sleeping without guards one day. It would mean telling Rose the truth in pieces. Dante's plan had worked, and Hawk was forced to run instead of hunt. Yet I wasn't celebrating a win, I was preparing a boundary. If Dante offered protection, would decide the price. Tonight proved I could see wolves. Next I had to choose where my son would grow safely. At 6:50 in the morning, Lake Geneva looked like glass that had forgotten how to move. A pale mist hovered above the water, and the air tasted clean enough to make my lungs feel new. I stood on the wooden dock wrapped in a sweater. Mrs. Delaney had pressed into my hands, and for the first time in days my shoulders unclenched without permission. Last night's theater had been a storm trapped inside old walls. This morning the world was quieter. Silas Hawke and the people who moved like his shadows were scattered, forced to run instead of hunt. Dante had not claimed victory with fireworks, he had simply closed doors, cut channels, and let Hawke's network choke on its own panic. Ryan Blake's voice still existed somewhere in a courthouse or a holding cell, but it no longer reached me the way it once did. With proof in my pocket and protection around my family, his story started to sound like noise. In the quiet, I finally opened the SD card Jack Carter had hidden beneath a planter. Dante had provided a secure tablet and stepped away, leaving me alone with the file as if it were a prayer. The recording began with my father's breathing, uneven and familiar, like he was sitting at our old kitchen table pretending not to worry me. He spoke my name once, soft with regret, then spoke about choices he made when he thought danger could be controlled like money. He admitted he had taken more than cash, he had taken leverage and evidence from men who believed they were untouchable. He said he did it because he saw a future where those men eventually reached me anyway, and he wanted something to stop them when he was gone. My anger rose hot and fast. I wanted to tell him that his secrets did not protect me, they built the trap that swallowed my wedding day. But as the recording continued, I heard how scared he had been, how he kept delaying the truth because he wanted one more normal year with me, one more birthday where Eli could blow out candles without armed men outside the door. Jack knew he was failing, and he still tried to leave me an exit sign in the only language he understood. I cried quietly, not because I forgave him, but because I finally saw the full weight of what he carried alone. Later that morning Dante met me in the hall outside my room. He offered a new identity, money, travel routes, the kind of safety that came with keys and rules. He could make Mia Carter disappear on paper and replace her with a name that didn't attract predators. I listened and felt the temptation like warm bread. A fresh start sounded holy. Then I pictured Eli learning to answer to a different last name, and my spine straightened. I made my boundary clear without raising my voice. I would accept protection for my son and my mother, and I would use Dante's resources to keep Silas Hawke from circling back. But I would not be collateral, not a prize, and not a hostage dressed up as a guest. If Dante wanted me near him, it would be because I chose it, and because he respected the lines I drew around Eli and Rose. By mid-morning Rose arrived with my boy. He ran down the path toward the dock, cheeks pink from wind, and I dropped to my knees to catch him like he was something I had dreamed. He didn't ask for details, he just wanted to show me a flat stone he had found. I watched him skip it across the water and felt ordinary life return in tiny pieces. Rose stood behind us, eyes tired but steady, and I realized the strongest love I had ever known was still here. Behind us, Dante kept his distance, a dark figure at the edge of sunlight, letting this reunion belong to us. I noticed that restraint and stored it the way I store everything now. Power can take. Power can also step back. That difference is where healing begins for me and my boy. I don't know what comes next for Dante, or for me and the dark world that tried to claim my name. I only know this: betrayal doesn't get the final word unless you hand it the microphone. I rebuilt my breath first, then my boundaries, then my life. If you stayed with me through all of it, I hope you hold tighter to the people who make you feel safe. And if you want more stories like this, please like, share, And comment what city you are listening from so I can picture how far this journey traveled tonight.